Hello, my good friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're going to be learning in the laws of not serving idols. In chapter 6 of the Rambam, we're going to be discussing various forms of idol worship which are mentioned in the Torah. So the Rambam is going to be telling us about these various forms of idol worship, what they include, and the fact that the Torah spells them out to us, and tells us that we're not allowed to do them. So we're going to be learning what they are and what we're not allowed to do. So there are two types of idol worship which actually go together. There are two types which the Torah mentions to us. One is called the Ov and one is called the Yid-Oni. So these are two different types of idol worship, and we are not allowed to do any of them. And this is what is involved. So the Ov is basically a person that will bring a certain incense offering. It's a certain composition and recipe of what they would put together for this special incense offering, and then they would take a myrtle branch and they would wave it with their hand and speak in a hushed voice, saying certain things, and it would be sounding as if there was someone talking to them quietly, which you can't really hear, and telling them various things. That as if the idol or this worshipping is going to give you a certain insight. And there is another form where they would take a skull of a dead person and they would sacrifice things to it, and they would speak to it, and it would be as if the skull is speaking back to them and telling them. So all this is the idea of the idol worship of Ov, and we're not allowed to do it. And if someone does, so then they would be liable and be killed. So then there is the Yid-Oni. The Yid-Oni is another form of idol worship. Over there they would take a certain bone of a bird, which was called Yidua. It's a certain type of bird, and they would put it in their mouth, and then they would bring certain incense offerings, and they would, so to speak, fall into a trance and start saying prophetic things of what's going to be taking place in the future. So that's also obviously not allowed. Now, there is another form of idol worship which is called Molech. Molech is an interesting form of idol worship where they would take their children and they would make two big fires, and then these people would take their children or any of their offspring and give it to the priests of this idol, and the priest would pass it back to the parent, and then the parent would walk between the two fires or over the fire, so to speak, not by burning the child, God forbid, which is another type of idol worship, but not this one. But they would just lead the child through the fire, and that is called Molech, and that is something which we're not allowed to do whatsoever. And the person will not be liable if he only did part of it. In other words, if he only passed it to the priest and then the priest walked through, or he only walked through without the priest, but without the priest passing it to him. So there was a specific way it was supposed to be done, and only if it was done in that specific way, so then the person would be liable. And when we're talking about offspring, we're talking about any offspring, whether it's a child or grandchild or any of their offspring. If it was a brother or a father or another sibling, someone related to them, but it's not offspring, so then they would not be liable. Then there is an idea, the Torah says, that we're not allowed to build a monument as a form of serving God. So only in the temple is the only place where we're allowed to build a monument for God. And in general, we're not allowed to bow down to rocks, to stone. So therefore, we're not allowed to just, even in a synagogue, anywhere in the world, we're not allowed to bow down. Let's say on Yom Kippur, it's customary to bow down all the way onto the ground. We should not do it if it's on a stone floor. And if it's paved, we're still not allowed to do it, like tiles or something like that, but the person would not be liable. But the truth is that Yom Kippur, for instance, when we do bow down, it's one of the only times a year. It's the only time a year that we do bow down, actually physically, onto our hands and knees. If it's a stone floor or tiled floor, so then it's customary we do put a carpet or a little rug or something that would be between us and the floor, because that is something which we're not allowed to do, because we're not allowed to bow down to any stone form in whatever way it does come. But within the temple, so then we are allowed to do this. In the temple, we're allowed to bow down to God, because as it says in the verse, do not do that in your own land. In other words, you're not allowed to bow down to a stone in our own place, but in the temple that would be allowed. And so, as we said, that if it was tiled or stones that are not just natural, so then, although from the Torah the person will not be liable, but still the rabbis instituted that a person is not allowed to do it as well. And the last idea of what we're talking about in today's Rambam is that we're not allowed to plant a tree in the temple. Because in the temple, there had to be no trees whatsoever, because one of the forms of idol worship is by planting a tree next to an altar. They would build their altars, the various idol worshippers, and they would put a tree near it so that people should come and get some shade and be a nice place to come. So in the temple, we are not allowed. It clearly spells out in the Torah that we're not allowed to plant a tree within the temple, and so much so that even the various balconies or structures within the temple, if they had different things within the temple, they were not allowed to build them out of wood, so that it should not symbolize any part of this tree form of idol worship, but rather they were made out of stone. The building itself of the temple, it would seem like, from what the Rambam is saying, is that it would be fine to build a temple out of wood, as long as that it's only the main outer structure. But within the temple, if it's a balcony or something which is within the space of the temple, in the airspace, we're not allowed to have anything made out of wood. So that is the chapter of Rambam today. For today, it's short, and this is what it's all about, telling us various forms of idol worship which we're not allowed to do, the things that the Torah spelled us out. So although the Rambam told us that we're not allowed to be studying the various forms of idol worship, the ones that the Torah told us clearly, so those we should study and we should know what they are, so that we should not do them. But any other form of idol worship we should just keep away from, and we should not talk about it, think about it, or get close to it, but rather to focus our belief and invest our time in studying about God and our belief in Him. So that is what it's all about. I hope you have a good day, and we will continue tomorrow.